When you have the testimony of many pilots flying together and witnessing an event, and these are individuals who have top secret clearances. By the way, these are trained observers. We've spent millions of dollars in training them to be keen observers. When they tell you this doesn't fit a normal profile, we need to listen. People will tell you it's IR glare, and they have these weird ideas that it's some sort of 747 from far away. The bottom line is they don't know. There would be a national uproar here that we could have an aircraft that we did not control in our airspaces. People would have been fired, there'd be congressional testimony. And here we have the same situation, but because there's no Russian tail number or there's no North Korean flag on the aircraft, it's crickets. Nobody wants to have the conversation.
On December 17, 2017, important and historic article has been published on the front page of New York Times. It was written by journalists Helen Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Kane. The article was titled "Real UFOs? Pentagon Unit Tried to Know." One day earlier, the same article was published in digital form on New York Times website. This important article described the U.S. Department of Defense program titled Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was formed back in 2007, and the mandate was to investigate and evaluate UFOs in the context of potential aerospace threats. Exposed existence of this program opens a lot of new implications about the long debated question on reality of UFOs. So I decided to get into contact with the main protagonist who was a member of that DoD program, which is Mr. Luis Elizondo, the former director of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And as far as I know, by the date of this release, this will be the longest interview with Mr. Elizondo that will be available in public domain. We had more time to go into deeper questions. This interview was conducted on January 15, 2018, while I was on my journalistic assignments in Croatia, and the segments from this interview will be aired on Croatian National Television in the near future. However, since I'm considering this interview to be of extreme importance, I have decided to release it in the uncut full form, so it could be a part of public record and public service. And I would like to thank a very good and kind colleague who turned this planned interview of mine into reality. I was also honored to speak with Mr. Elizondo, and he was such a gentleman and professional who granted me 1 hour of his time. So once again, this is a full 1 hour interview with Mr. Luis Elizondo. And I'm your host, Giuliano Marinkovic. Thank you, Mr. Elizondo, for granting me this interview. I was thinking that first we could start with your career, and after that I have created several questions where we will go deeper into DoD program.
Absolutely, no problem. Hey, feel free to ask me any question you want. If there is something I cannot answer because it remains classified or sensitive, I will of course let you know. But if it's unclassified, I will absolutely answer it for you.
Yeah, I completely understand that part too. Whenever you think there are any sensitivities inside any question, just let me know and I will back off. So no worries, because I was signal intelligence specialist myself, so I completely understand your position.
Perfect.
So I guess for the beginning, can you tell us something about your bio and your career so the listeners and viewers could get better insight about you as a person?
Sure. After college, I joined the Army. The Army, for many people, offers opportunities, both experience and financially, that help pay for college. I had a large college bill, and I always had this desire to serve. So for me, it was a natural decision to join the Army because I could serve my country and at the same time minimize some of the financial burden that I had incurred while going to college and studying microbiology and immunology and the sciences that I did. So I joined the Army, and when I went into the Army, I was a counterintelligence special agent. So I did investigations, espionage and terrorism investigations, and I was in the Army for a fairly short period of time. Once my obligation was up, I was then brought into a special operations program, on the civilian side. And so I worked with the intelligence community and the Department of Defense the rest of my career as a civilian, and living abroad in places like Latin America, the Middle East, Afghanistan, and whatnot. So prior to September 11th, most of my career emphasis was on Latin America, so Central America, South America, the Caribbean. But immediately following the events of September 11th, my career shifted, and I focused primarily on the Middle East. So I spent a good deal of time there, and was able to serve with some fantastic human beings like Mattis. So James Mattis, who is the Secretary of Defense. I had the honor and privilege to serve with him in combat, and it is there that I was able to observe myself the type of person, the truly incredible person that he really is. If you were to ask me and others that served with him, we would all tell you he is truly an American hero, and he is the very best of the best that we have. Not so jokingly, I think if he were to run for president this next election, he'd probably have a lot of supporters like us. And then from there, I wound up running investigations. So I was early in my career as a civilian, I was the special agent in charge of several offices. And then from there, I moved to D.C. My wife, I think, was getting tired of me deploying all the time. And my family, my young daughters wanted to spend more time with me. So I took a promotion. I came to Washington, D.C., and I spent the rest of my career here working at places such as the National Counterintelligence Executive, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and, of course, back here at the Department of Defense.
And I think also what I was able to find, you are, of course, well, it's a rich career, and you are also a technical thinker too, because you hold several patents, and I was able to find one titled Never Ship Empty, right? So maybe you could talk a little bit about that too. It looks like a fascinating concept.
Sure. I think everybody has a hobby. Some people like to watch rugby. Some people like to go to bars. Some people like to ride motorcycles and shoot guns. For me, I've always been a little bit of an introvert. I prefer to stay quiet, and I am an inventor. I look at things, how we can make processes better, how we can make things better, whether they be in actually mechanical instruments or they are business processes. I believe we can always improve on almost everything that we do as mankind, and it is in the pursuit of those improvements that I find myself being an inventor. I think for me it is an outlet that allows me to not only be creative, but also to help, if I can, mankind in just a very minor way, become more efficient, get better at doing things, faster at doing things, improving productivity and input and throughput and output. I think we as mankind, it's in our DNA. I think it's in our genetics to improve on things and to explore. And so, ironically, I found the last 10 years of my life, both privately and officially, in those two roles. That is, improving and exploring.
Oh, yeah, and I think this specific patent, Never Ship Empty, was dealing with ship cargo. So the idea was for the main base of the ship to be easily detached.
Yes, sir.
So the time would not be spent on sorting the cargo itself, right?
Yes, sir. That was one of them. I wanted to help try to improve throughput. I spent a good deal of time on the water, and there's a lot of inefficiencies. Right now, 90% of the world's cargo moves by boat, and these container boats are very efficient because of economy of scale. But the one, if you will, chink in the armor is when they come to port and when they try to offload and load. It's still very, very archaic. It's still very, very labor-intensive, and it is not an efficient process at all. So that was the bottleneck that we were trying to address.
Now we will speak about, of course, the main news and the main role of yours during recent media wave, and that is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. That DoD program was described in historic New York Times article from December 16, 2017. I guess the name itself describes the mandate in general terms, but maybe you can expand on that. What was the meaning of that program and what was the mandate in actual sense?
Sure. So I think your summation is absolutely correct. Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program was established to do just that. Identify any threats. I think there's been some confusion recently. Some folks had said advanced airborne. It was never airborne. It was advanced aerospace. So these are potentially objects that are both in our atmosphere and maybe not in our atmosphere, that are maneuvering in such a way that they don't fit a common profile of what we know to be typical type of aircraft, whether they be drones, whether they be missiles, whether they be airplanes. These are objects that are defying the traditional profile of something we would normally consider to be an aircraft of some sort. And so as a result, the Department of Defense takes seriously anything that it cannot identify positively. We have to presume it can be a threat until it is proven it is not a threat. And so that was the purpose of the program, was to identify these anomalies, these phenomena that did not fit easily into a category of or a profile that we know of.
There are some media reports that I could see about the timeline of the project. I mean, for me, the timeline is clear because I watched all the media pieces that I was able to collect. Still, it would be good to clear that up for the listeners because there were some contradicting articles on that note. Maybe you can tell us when the program was formed initially, when you became the formal director.
Sure.
How the program's budget was affected through the years, and especially what was happening after 2012 with the program.
Sure. So, Giuliano, the program started in 2007. In 2007, it was a bipartisan effort, which is something the media, I think, has missed here. This was, in this country, we have the two major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. In this particular case, it was Senator Harry Reid, along with Senator Stevens, who is Republican, and Senator Inouye. All three of them are veterans, along with the support of Senator John Glenn, who is an astronaut, and all of them have served their country very honorably. And so, through various reporting that they had, in fact, Stevens, in as a pilot, reported being chased by something, by a phenomenon. So these are individuals who are absolutely heroes for our country, and they are reporting that they believe there is something out there that we need to look at. So the program was established as a bipartisan effort. It was then sent to one of the defense agencies within the Department of Defense there was an open bid. Anybody could bid for the contract, and it turned out that Bigelow Aerospace won the contract. Keep in mind, this wasn't selected by Reed. This was an independent internal process by the Defense Intelligence Agency for this contract. It was DIA who chose who had the contract, not Senator Reed. So I think that's an important detail that gets lost. And then in 2008, I was asked to come on board by the former program manager to provide counterintelligence support within this portfolio. I did not have any idea what this program was about. I had several meetings with people until I realized more or less what this was about. And then in 2010, when the last program manager was going into a new assignment, I was asked to take over the program. And I subsequently accepted it. And from 2010 till roughly 3.5 months ago, I ran the AATIP program. Now, the funding, the initial tranche of funding ended in 2012. Then in 2013, there was additional funding that came through the department. Unfortunately, the wording in the language for the funds was a little bit nebulous, a little bit general. So another office within the department wound up taking that money and using it for their purposes. But it was indeed intended for us. And then we continued to run the program, obviously with a lot less support, until about 3.5 months ago. I cannot tell you now if the program is up and running, because I am no longer an employee of the U.S. government, and I am not allowed to speak on behalf of the government. But what I can tell you is up until the day I left, the program was alive and well. It was fairly robust. We had some incredible men and women who were part of this effort, and I had support from my very senior levels of leadership that the program was, in fact, to be turned over to one of my successors, and that was effectively done.
Yeah, and that is a very important part that you just cleared up. Some people were confused and they were thinking that after 2012 and after $22 million budget was spent that the program ended. And some people were commenting like why you waited so long to step out after 2012. But obviously the program had continuation all the way and it was present after 2012. So thank you so much for clearing that up. Thank you also for explaining DIA and the Robert Bigelow contracting process. That point was definitely lost by the media. Again, like you said, some media outlets, for example, were attacking Reed, thinking that there was some malversation with money. So that was very important point that you just explained. I would like now to move the conversation to the technical side. Detection of UAP phenomena probably involves very sophisticated sensors and data that was extracted from two DoD platforms. So I would also think that such a fact alone should be the first step to evaluate is this phenomena just a folklore or is it a technically detectable manifestation as something physical. So can you expand on that as I think that is a key point in researching this phenomena?
Sure. So I think it's important first for your readers or your listeners to understand that the two videos that came out were just very small samples of additional data that the program collected. And by the way, certainly after 2012 in some cases, but I can't go much beyond that. But what I can say is that in each case, the videos provide specific, detailed information that would allow an expert, whether you are a radar operator or you're an electro-optical specialist, to look at the videos and determine, is this something that we have seen before? Keeping in mind, our effort was a very comprehensive effort. We didn't just rely on videos. We didn't just rely on radar. We didn't just rely on eyewitness testimony. It was an amalgamation of all that data put together that allowed us to build a profile of what we were seeing. And in some cases, we would receive information that we could figure out fairly quickly what it was. But unfortunately, there were many, many instances that because of the flight performance characteristics and what we were seeing and what we were being told and what we were able to track on radar defied any such known profile of any aircraft in any world's inventory. So from that perspective, when you have the testimony of pilots, not a pilot, but many pilots, flying together and witnessing an event, and these are individuals who have top secret clearances. They are in charge of multi-million-dollar weapon platforms. Some cases they are trusted to fly over U.S. cities with live munition. And so when they are telling you they're seeing something, by the way, these are trained observers. We've spent millions of dollars in training them to be keen observers. When they tell you this doesn't fit a normal profile, we need to listen. I think there's a stigma about this that nobody wants to talk about. But these folks are trained to fight wars on our behalf. We trust them to fight and win wars, and yet we don't trust them to tell us they're seeing something they can't identify. And on top of that, we have the video, and then you also have the radar returns. I also think it's important to note, I think there's been some discussion by the media that I've purposely leaked these videos. That is not the case. These videos went through an official review process through the Pentagon per the directive, per DoD directive. And then furthermore, an additional step, foreign disclosure team, the senior-most foreign disclosure team, also reviewed these videos and agreed that they were unclassified. The intent for the videos was to establish an unclassified community of interest, or if you will, a virtual environment that would allow everybody to look at this and help us determine what signatures we were seeing. And by the way, did anybody else out there see anything similar that can help us figure out what these things are? And to this day, no one has had the conversation, but no one has been able to figure out what these are. So as much negative press people are putting on these videos, I haven't had anyone come up to me and tell me definitively what it is. And I think that's very frustrating because people will tell you it's IR glare or IR fuzz, and they have these weird ideas that it's some sort of 747 from far away. The bottom line is they don't know. And I think we need to have the conversation collectively, and we need to not just look at the video. We need to look at the radar returns. We need to talk to the pilots, because when we look at one piece of information, it's very easy for us to make presumptions and assumptions of what we think it might be. But in the end, you have to have all the information in front of you before you can make that conclusion. And I believe that there are people now that are jumping to conclusions without having all the facts. And I think that's very dangerous, because what it does, it puts in the minds of people that what we are looking at is simply an atmospheric anomaly. And look, radar returns don't track atmospheric anomalies, and pilots don't see atmospheric anomalies moving at hypersonic speeds above the water. And atmospheric anomalies isn't going to affect and perturb the water the way these things are doing. And there's a lot of commonality here that, unfortunately, we have not been able to talk about, because I'm not sure I'm allowed to talk about, that paint a very compelling picture that this is not IR glare we're looking at. This is a real tangible object maneuvering in a way that remains unexplained to this day. They are, by definition, they are an object, they are unidentified, and they are flying. So, now, truth be told, I think the word UFO is all in the eye of the beholder. I think if you were to talk to a remote village in the South Pacific in World War II, and they had seen a B-17 fly over the island, they may call that a UFO. They would say, we've never seen that before. That is a UFO. And in fact, we still have now these cargo religions right now in the South Pacific dedicated to aircraft. Now, we know them to be simply technological vehicles, but to somebody who's never seen one, they are technically an unidentified flying object. So the question remains, Giuliano, what as a people do we want to do? Is this important enough for us to collectively look at and determine, is this a problem? Keeping in mind these things may be over our airspace, our controlled airspace. And these are things that we have no idea what they are, we have no idea how they work, and there's nothing we can do about it. So from a national security perspective, one has to ask the question, is it a threat? Maybe it's not a threat, and let me, if I may, digress for just a moment and give you another example.
Sure.
If I may ask you, Giuliano, do you lock your front door at night when you go to bed?
No. You mean the outside door, right?
Yeah, the outside door.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely right. And we do that to be cautious. We don't expect anything to come in, but just in case. Well, let me ask you this. Let's say every night you went to lock your front door. Every night you locked your windows, and every night you set your alarm. And every morning you wake up, there are muddy footprints in your living room carpet. And there are these muddy footprints that lead to nowhere. Nothing has been taken from your home. Nothing has been disturbed, but there are muddy footprints each morning in your front living room. Now, I would ask you, is that a threat? The answer is, we don't know. But the fact that you are locking your doors, you're locking your windows, and you're turning on your alarm system, and somehow, some way, something is getting into your house, you have to presume it could be a threat until we're sure it's not.
Yeah, and it's definitely an intrusion that should be investigated 100%, and that's a great analogy. And I also wanted to raise the issue that some people were trying to interpret the videos and give their interpretation as an airplane in the distance, like you said. But I think this is the key point now, right? The correlation of multiple data. They are just watching at a very small sample out of context, sort of, if they are only looking at a video without taking into consideration the overall situation. And on top of that, the AATIP program was filtering out prosaic cases already on the source, right?
Right.
That's
and
great.
If I may go one step further, maybe these are adversarial aircraft, it's possible. But if these are adversarial aircraft that are displaying such futuristic technologies and technically advanced technologies, and we are obligated to figure out who they belong to. More importantly, this has been going on for decades. So whoever has this technology has had this technology for a very long time, which is even more alarming. So no matter where these things are from, I believe we have a patriotic and a moral obligation to figure out what these things are and how these things work.
Absolutely, it should be the mandate of DoD or any other military institution. And I think that leads us to another question, and that is the fact that your program was able to identify 5 basic and also fascinating categories about performance of these objects. So maybe you can expand on those. I think we are speaking about low observability, positive lift, and so on.
Yeah, so I think it is, when you look at these, there's 5 common observations we continue to see, or observables we continue to see with these things that would require us to have a very good understanding of advanced physics. And those observables can be categorized as follows. So the first observable is sudden and instantaneous acceleration. These are objects that are moving in a manner that if there was a biological system inside it, should not be able to withstand those type of sudden G-forces. Any biological system that we are aware of, to include wearing G-suits and whatnot, would not be able to withstand these G-forces at all. The second thing is hypersonic velocities, and not just supersonic, but hypersonic, an object moving well above the limitations of supersonic speed, and objects that are moving in a way that don't have any apparent signature related to that. So there's no heat trail coming off the object that's moving very fast through the atmosphere. There's no sonic boom of these objects. So things that would traditionally be associated with objects moving at very fast speeds, even though we can see them moving that fast, we don't see a signature. The third observable would be, it's a bit of an oxymoron, but it's low observability. So whether you're looking at these things electro-optically through, let's say, a gun camera, or you're looking at these things with a naked eye, or you're looking at these through radar, in the end, we are using the electromagnetic spectrum to try to figure out what these things look like. And unfortunately, what we're getting as a return seems to be a bit nonsensical. We are looking at objects that people will describe, well, it was semi-metallic. I didn't really get a good view of it. I could see it, but it didn't look like anything I've ever seen. It was a bit fuzzy. In other cases, you look at the gun camera and you see an object there, but you cannot see. It's almost impossible to actually see the object instead of seeing what is around the object. And in other cases, radar returns coming back nonsensical. Despite having the best of the best radar, we might pick up glimpses and pieces of it here and there, and then all of a sudden our radars get, either turned off or our radar can't pick something up. So the low observable would be the third. The fourth observable is basically an object that has the ability to move in the various layers of the Earth's atmosphere, possibly even in outer space, and possibly even through water, seemingly without any type of normal resistance friction associated with objects moving in that manner through a medium. And then the last but not least is, and probably the most important, is positive lift. The last observable is an object apparently resisting the natural effects of Earth's gravity, yet without the normally associated aerodynamic structures that would require an object to either have lift or thrust. So no visible engines, no visible engine exhaust plumes, no wings, no rudders, no ailerons, no fins, and yet able to maneuver in a very precise manner in our atmosphere, despite not having any of these characteristics. So I think those five observables, when you see them all together, then we are forced to scratch our head and figure out that maybe we don't know what these things are.
Absolutely, and all these are very important clues that leads me to absolutely fascinating case that was a part of one of two released videos, and that is a USS Nimitz case from November 2004, which summarized most of these anomalistic and exotic performances. Can you give us a short summary about that case? I read it myself so many times, and I'm always fascinated with it whenever I read it again.
Sure. So a little bit about the Nimitz case. This is a case that until recently nobody admitted ever happened. The Nimitz were doing their workups off the coast of California in 2004. Despite what people say, it was 2005, we actually have the logbook. So again, this is misinformation by, I think, well-minded people who don't have all the facts. But the bottom line, it was in November 2004 that the event happened. And we learned this because I talked to four of the pilots, and we actually have the written verification. So we know exactly when the event occurred. It was a clear morning off the coast of San Diego. Two F-18 Super Hornets, commanded now that everybody knows by Commander Fravor, who was a commander of, by the way, the most elite of the elite, called the Black Aces. If you ever had the privilege and honor to meet this guy, he is truly an American hero, just like Mattis. He has paid his dues and then some. And he was leading the pack, if you will, of F-18s, the two F-18s. Jim Slate was the backseater. He was the Wizzo. And then you had another F-18, which I don't know if the identities of those pilots have come out yet, so I can't release those identities. But again, all trained observers and in charge of multi-million-dollar weapon systems. And as they were doing the train-ups with the Marine Corps, which were playing the Red Force, they received a call from the Princeton, and they were revectored to a new location. And as they were being revectored, the two F-18s were talking back and forth, wondering if maybe this was a drug interdiction or something like that, because apparently it was live. It wasn't an exercise. And at one point, the Princeton asked the F-18s, asked both of them, what were their loadouts? What were their weapon loadouts? Now, keep in mind, they're training, so they shouldn't have any weapon loadouts. So they were surprised by that. Unless this was a real-world scenario, you wouldn't need weapons. especially over the continental United States and our territorial waters. So that was strange. And one of the pilots had indicated to me they thought maybe this was another September 11th style attack, and they were going to go interdict something. So as they finally got to the place, one of the radar operators on the Princeton had informed Fravor and the other individuals that they have been tracking these things over the last week. Many of these things, sometimes up to 20 of these things, coming in out of 80,000 feet, dropping down to 20,000 feet, in some cases just 50 feet over the water, and then popping right back up. And it's not that they were going to 80,000 feet and flying away. We didn't track them anymore after that. And so they were maneuvering in a very odd way. And so as Commander Fravor and his folks got over the target area, they noticed the water was perturbed and roiling in an otherwise very calm, steady sea state, very blue skies, excellent weather conditions. And the water was roiling, and as they looked down, they saw this very fast, what looked like a white tic-tac, flying very fast over the water. And so as Commander Fravor tried to engage the target began to outmaneuver Commander Fravor. By the way, in one of our most sophisticated aircraft we had at the time, this thing was actually towing with him, to the point when Commander Fravor finally tried to engage this thing directly, it took off, and within, he expresses it as a couple seconds, and this is backed up by the radar, it was completely gone. So taking off in a position, so it had initially orientated itself towards Commander Fravor as if guarding itself, and then as Commander Fravor came in to get a closer look, it shot off. And more importantly here, not only did it fly off at several thousands upon thousands of miles an hour without a sonic boom or anything like that, no associated signature, within a minute or two of them collecting their thoughts and heading off to their next location, Commander Fravor was informed that the object was now waiting for them at their next plot location. So somehow the object not only outmaneuvered both aircraft very easily, but also managed to know where the next location, their next point on the map that they were supposed to go to. Somehow it knew that. It was able, maybe it exploited the electronic systems on the aircraft, or who knows. But somehow the object was waiting for them at their next merge plot, and that's a problem. So they canceled their flight. They went back to the Nimitz, and at that point, some folks were teasing them. Obviously, Commander Fravor and company were not happy about it. They were concerned that this was a danger to them and their aircraft and the mission. And so 2 more F-18s were launched immediately after Fravor's folks had returned and recovered on the ship. And it was those 2 F-18s that actually took the footage of one of the videos that you see.
That is an absolutely fascinating case. I mean, so many layers and technical details. Your program actually interviewed the pilots, right?
Yes, sir.
And you evaluated the case. Do you know, was there any initial investigation that happened back in 2004, or you actually took the case originally as a first party?
I can't answer precisely when an investigation was actually launched, a very comprehensive investigation. But unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to give the precise time or by who did it. I believe that information may still belong to the government, so I have to be cautious of that. But an investigation was, in fact, executed. That is correct.
Thanks so much for that. There is another very interesting section in the New York Times article. I know it's sensitive, but I will mention it. It is related to alleged storage of exotic material by Robert Bigelow's company, which was a contractor of AATIP program. I know that you can't go into it, but can you maybe give us some comments,
Sure.
At least in general terms?
Sure. So I think it's important. Let me first clear things up, too. So when the media was very accurate in its reporting, but one part of it was a little bit off, and let me explain what happened. So when the contract was let to have a storage facility, The intent of that storage facility was to be able to store any type of sensitive information, data, or material that might or could be recovered in the future. So whether or not material has been actually recovered and is stored in that facility, I am unable to comment. But what I can tell you is that the intent of that facility was to be able, should we need it to, store material, information, and data in a secure manner. Now, what type of material are we talking about? We're not talking about unidentified alloys that people continue to hit on. What we are talking about we're talking about metamaterials whose isotopic ratios are so unique that they are not found here naturally on this planet, and those isotopes isotopic ratios are in such a way that technologically it would be exceptionally expensive for us to try to replicate. And so that is really, when they say unknown metal alloys, it wasn't actually unknown metal alloys. It was metamaterials that have a radioisotopic ratio that is not found here on this planet, and therefore the origins of those metamaterials are unknown. And that is really how it unfortunately should have been portrayed, but understanding not everybody is a material scientist. So I think the lay description, although a little bit misleading and not intentionally, someone had said metal alloys when really we were talking about metamaterials. But I think somewhere it got lost in translation and someone said unknown alloys when it's really metamaterials with unknown origins because of the isotopic ratio. Now, with that said, everything that moves in our environment leaves some sort of signature. And sometimes that signature is in the form of light and heat. Sometimes it's in the form of sound. Sometimes it's in the form of metal. If you look at an aircraft sitting on the tarmac, sometimes bits and pieces of its tire might fall off. Sometimes fuel might leak. Sometimes, in rare instances, a piece of aircraft might actually fall off of an aircraft if it's performing some extreme maneuvers. So from our perspective, anything that potentially could be left behind would be enormously to better understand its performance characteristics and perhaps even its origins. So from that perspective, yes, any and everything that could potentially be associated with one of these phenomena is something that we would want to get our hands on and analyze.
Yeah, any type of residue that could be used for later analysis. Thanks so much for that. And I think that this whole discovery of this program is actually historic from the sense that it changes some so-called established conclusions about the UFO phenomena itself. For example, United States Air Force had a program Blue Book from 40s to 1969 that was concluded by Condon Committee from the University of Colorado. And whenever somebody asks or inquires about the UFO phenomena, government is always presenting these three conclusions by Condon Committee, which are no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security. Then they say there was no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represented technological developments or principles beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge. And they also say on top of that there was no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified were extraterrestrial vehicles. End of quote. But obviously, some of these points are now directly opposed by your findings and by the facts that your program discovered. So do you have any comment regarding that historic evaluation by the Air Force and by the Condon Committee?
Well, I think the department is a very big organization. And I think Secretary Mattis inherited an organization that had a lot of stovepipes and a lot of silos. And in addition to that, there's been a great deal of taboo against anybody reporting this information. So I'm not surprised that senior levels of the Air Force have reported there has been no additional sightings. But not everybody in the department necessarily knows what other people are doing. And in my role, I was at the OSD level. So I sat as part of the Office of Secretary of Defense staff. I wasn't in the Air Force. I wasn't with the services. I was more part of the overhead, if you will, for the department. And I ran several sensitive programs. So it's not uncommon that one organization in the department doesn't know about another organization's efforts or activities. Unfortunately, that is sometimes the case. But keeping in mind, there's a lot of stigma and taboo here, and so there are a lot of people who may officially not want to report this kind of information because they are worried about their security clearance. They want to be kept on flight status, and they don't want to be perceived as being crazy or fringe or anything like that. These are patriots. These are fantastic Americans that are trying to do their job. They do it silently, they do it diligently, and they do it professionally. And anytime you see something like this, you have an obligation to report it. But at the same time, you don't want to lose your career and your livelihood over something like this. So it is perfectly understandable why there was some resistance and hesitation by many to have this conversation. Giuliano, I'll tell you, I risked everything to do this. I'm not sure people understand. I gave up a fantastic career. I was at the top of my game. I had tremendous respect in the building. And, I gave up a retirement, a pension, and everything to do this. A lot of people are willing to do this as a hobby. A lot of people are willing to do this as kind of a, if you will, as a side effort. But this was my job, and coming out like this was very, very uncomfortable. It was not easy. I can assure you, I gave up almost everything to do this because I believe in what I was doing, and I believe that the department must take this seriously, and there must be a way that allows our people, our folks, our patriots, our heroes to report this information up through the chain without being worried about any type of stigma or retribution. And I understood going out I was going to get a tremendous amount of ridicule, and I'm still getting that ridicule because people don't know my intentions. They don't know what we did in the last 10 years, and understandably, some people are mad. Since I've left, I've received 2 threats from people inside that building, which to me is almost unfathomable. I've had my security clearance threatened, and then I had someone call me and actually tell me maybe I should be threatened for my personal safety. Now that's kind of seems crazy and a little bit ridiculous, I understand, but it nonetheless happened. And that's a problem for me. It's a problem because I'm trying to allow our country to have a conversation. And in the end, this is not under the fact that there are things we can't explain is not the providence of any government or any institution. It's just like Galileo making the point that the Earth was not the center of the solar system. That is not a classifiable fact. So my point being is if this is something that the American people think is important enough to make a national security priority, then they need to have a conversation and let them decide. In the end, I really don't care what the American people decide as long as they have the ability to make that decision themselves. But to keep that information from the American people and not even have a conversation, that is a problem. Because if any of these things, let me give you an example, if any of these things were to come over the United States territory or territorial waters or controlled areas, and they had, let's say, a Russian tail number or a North Korean flag on them, there would be a national uproar here that could happen, that we could have an aircraft that we did not control in our airspace. People would have been fired, there'd be congressional testimony. And here we have the same situation, but because there's no Russian tail number or there's no North Korean flag on the aircraft, it's crickets. Nobody wants to have the conversation. And I think that's inherently wrong. I think that's a dangerous mindset to have. We have to be able to have that conversation as a nation. And then whatever the American people decide, then I will march out and support that decision, and I will support it diligently and to the very best of my abilities. But to ridicule people and to not even have a conversation, in fact, suppress conversation and stifle it, that is not in fact, that's more of a national security threat, in my opinion, than any phenomena coming into our airspace.
Lou, I think that is beautifully said, and I think it shows your integrity. Let me just mention that journalist George Knapp interviewed Harry Reid, where Reid said that there were different fractions in Department of Defense. There were even some religious disputes, so it was really hard to do this work at the time in your program. Is that correct?
Yes, and there's religious fundamentalism. Unfortunately, that continues to suppress the conversation. And I respect them, I do, because I believe in their hearts they are doing the right thing. I think they feel they are protecting the American people, maybe by not having the conversation. I disagree with them, but I can respect their position. But then there's also people in society. You would not believe the backlash that exists. Even people who you think would support this, what we are doing, have come out against it. And it's because this information wasn't released on their terms, or maybe exactly how they anticipated the information should be released. Or in some cases, maybe they've made a cottage industry themselves, trying to tell people what this is really all about. And now that the cat's out of the bag, the narrative hasn't followed exactly the way they thought it should go. And so now we are a threat to them as well. And it's amazing. It is. I never expected to see so much. I understand it's an emotional moment, but hostility. It seems that from virtually every angle here, people are just they're not happy with this, and I don't expect them to be happy, because sometimes the truth isn't there to make you happy. Sometimes the truth actually hurts, and I get that, but. You know, the old saying says, the truth shall set you free. I mean, I would rather know the truth than live my life with my head buried in the sand. And I think the American people have a right to know what we're spending their money on, what we're spending our time on, what we're spending our effort, and the incredible talent that we have back in that building and around the world that have helped with this endeavor. These are... You know, it's not me, it's about them. These are amazing Americans and human beings that have put their credibility and their livelihoods on the line because they feel strongly that what we're seeing here is something that needs to be elevated. And, you know, if not for their sake, listen to what they have to say. Let's figure it out. And you know what? Maybe if it winds up being advanced aircraft from another country, then great, super. But at least now we know. And let's not live our lives burying our heads in the sand and ridiculing each other, because these things are real. This is reality. And what we are seeing is unquestionable and undeniable. So what we decide to do as a nation, that's up to the American people. That's not up to me. But I do think we need to continue to gather as much information as we can so we can make an informed decision. And that is my position. I don't think we should live with our lives buried in the sand. I think you do that, and that could have tremendously horrible consequences as a nation. We can't afford to do that.
And your resignation and even the letter for the Secretary of Defense showed your message, right? You want this to be better resolved with better focus, resources, so we could finally know once for all, right? Yes,
sir. And I think it's another important note. I never provided my resignation letter to anyone outside to the media. It was always to the department. It was a copy of a letter that went in to my leadership, and what I've been told is somebody, either current or former DOD, provided a copy of my letter to the media. It was never me. So the media came to me, and the New York Times said they were going to write a story, one way or the other, about my resignation letter. So at that point, I realized I had a choice. I could either give them my perspective, or they were going to write my perspective for me. But that letter was intended to Secretary Mattis. I think he deserved to know the truth. My familiarity with him Secretary Mattis has always been a man who wants more information, not less. And if anybody could break down those silos and stovepipes, he was a man who could do it. Believe me, I've seen that man in combat. If there is one man who can change the system for the good, it is him. And, that's what happened. And from my understanding, there were folks even within the department that didn't even want to share my resignation letter with the secretary, which is, again, indicative of the problem.
I have another sensitive question. I know that in Leslie Kane's book, there were arguments pro and contra. Is there maybe a deeper secretive program about this phenomena that has a long continuation, and maybe they even have explicit artifacts and so on? There are arguments for it and against it. For example, Colonel John Alexander tells a story in his book about Advanced Theoretical Physics Group that existed around 10 years before your program, and they tried to establish, is there a black program of that type, but they were unable to confirm it. So do you have any views on these possibilities? If you can say in limits, of course.
Well, if there's a classified program that I am aware of, I would not be able to discuss it in any way. But from general perspective, as I said, there's a lot of things that go on in the department that not necessarily everybody else is aware of. I would not be surprised if there were other pockets in the U.S. government that were doing what we were doing. In fact, I would hope that would be the case, but I cannot comment either way whether or not that is the case. I can tell you that I don't think. I think the approach would be different. Our approach was very specific to what we were trying to achieve, and unfortunately, Juliano, that's about all I can say about that.
Absolutely, completely understandable. And now you are a part of Tom DeLonge's team To the Stars, where you will apply further what you learned and what you gathered during your program in the Pentagon. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the future plans of yours, projects,
Sure.
and what To the Stars means to you.
Absolutely. So, To the Stars Academy represents an area. So let me first say why I left the department. There are a few times in life, in order to make an organization better, you actually have to leave it. In this particular case, I did not ask for this job that I was given. I was asked to take it, so I took it, as many other jobs I've had in the past. I was given a mission. That mission was to run AATIP and figure out what these things were and how they worked. And unfortunately, in order to accomplish the very mission I was given by the Department of Defense, I actually had to leave the department to do it. It was, in fact, my loyalty to the secretary why I left, that not because of disloyalty. My loyalty to the American people, the Department of Defense, and to the secretary are unwavering. But I also understood that in order for the department and the American people to take this to the next level, I would have to take the step of leaving the one department that I love so much and going to the private side to finish the mission. I think To the Stars is an organization that can help us achieve that. If you look for just one moment and who's there, you're talking about the giants of the aerospace industry and theoretical physicists and in some cases entertainers, and this is going to be a collective effort in order for us to take our observations and very hopefully one day soon build the very things that we're seeing. And yes, I know to some people they kind of scratch their head and they say, build? Yes, build. Because in the end what we're seeing it's not voodoo science. It is actually, it's advanced physics, but it's physics nonetheless. And it's physics that I think we are closer to understanding now than we ever have before. And so our hope is to get with the best and brightest and actually build a working prototype of exactly what we're seeing and use that to the benefit of mankind. I think people look at this To the Stars and they say, oh, it's a money-making machine. No, it's not. It's a money-raising machine. In order to do this right, you need money to build these things. I think Tom was brilliant to set up an organization. This is a B corporation that's stated to the public benefit. if you know anything about B corporations, they're very rare, and they're very labor-intensive. I mean, it's really a lot of work. Most folks don't want to do a B corporation because there's a lot of commitments and requirements to the public use and public good. And not only that, Tom did decided with the other folks in the organization, they were going to make this a company really for the people, by the people. And so by offering an opportunity for the public to invest, the public can now own the very thing we're trying to build. And I think that's very rare. Anytime you do something like an IPO, most people know very few people have an opportunity to really buy into something like that. When you do a DPO, anybody with $100 or so can now be part owner of an aerospace company. So I thought it was very bold and very brave and innovative for Tom and others to decide to go this way. Hal and Jim, they all agreed this was the way to go, and I agree. This is again where the media has gotten it wrong. They think this is some sort of money making endeavor, and it's not. It's a money raising endeavor, and it's to raise the money jointly so we can actually build these things for the betterment of everybody. So I think that's an important detail that gets lost with a lot of people. Believe me, I'm not. I would be doing much better right now if I was working for the government. Between all my benefits and my retirement, this was not an economically sound decision for me to join To the Stars Academy. So that leaves the other factor of why I did it. I did it because I believed it was the right thing to do. I believe if any organization has the ability now to actually build even a prototype at a small level, a scalable level, this could revolutionize virtually everything that we do as a species. This may be a paradigm shift for us. And then if other big companies want to come in and take it to the next level, I think that's great too. But Tom had it right. And I think there's a lot of criticism out there about Tom of what maybe his intentions are or were, or what his thoughts are or what his thoughts were. But in the end, Tom achieved something very few people have. He got the government at very high levels to acknowledge the fact that these things are real. And that is a game changer, and I think we owe a lot to Tom for that. I think people confuse Tom as, being a former rock star and an artist. Well, that is true, but I will tell you he's also a pioneer. I think he's a visionary, and I think as Tom and us collectively, we continue to move forward, I think our observations and our thoughts will continue to mature over time. There's a lot we still don't know or understand. Now, there's a lot we do. The bright side is we've come a long way in the last year and a half in our understanding, but we still have a long way to go. And I think as time goes on, any human being who's involved in something like this will tell you our opinions change over time, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a journey of personal growth. That's a journey about honesty. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. And in this particular case, there's a lot of unknowns. So we are collectively exploring this together, and hopefully with the help of with anybody and everybody who wants to take this journey with us, I'm very optimistic for the future. I think we have a great opportunity here to do something that will impact people in a very positive way. Now, I also understand from personal experience, history does not treat kindly those who try to rush it. And believe me, I have accepted many arrows and much grief over this. And it's not comfortable. If anybody wants to be in my shoes, I would tell you right now, run the other way. This is certainly not a way to make yourself rich or to make yourself popular. In fact, it's probably going to bankrupt me and make me the most hated man on the planet. But I believe in what I'm doing, and I have to look in the mirror and I have to look at my daughters in the face every day and tell them that what I'm doing is because I believe it's the right thing.
Well, some of them maybe will hate you, but I can tell you one thing now after this interview, you definitely have a fan in me. So, at least something.
Well, I appreciate that very, very much.
And if you will not try, you will never know. So I definitely think you have to proceed with your dream and your pet. You have the experience, background, and data. It will be a quest and interesting to see, I think. Lou, thank you so much for this conversation that we had.
It was my sincere honor and pleasure for you to spend some of your time with me, and you've been so gracious with it. And I hope I didn't bore you too much, or cause you to lose any fan base, because that was certainly not my intention.
Absolutely not. Thank you so much, Lou, once again.
Giuliano, thank you again so very much, and have a wonderful evening.
You too. Take care, Lou.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
UFORadio International, investigative podcast show about UFO phenomena.